Buddy Drew with Living History's Mysteries and Ferocious Feline Productions. I hope you guys are enjoying the 31 days of Halloween on Living History's Mysteries. You guys know how much I enjoy going out and looking through these historic cemeteries, doing our investigations. If you've been with the channel for a long time, you've seen us come across a few of those cemeteries where it just doesn't seem like the local residents want us there. But what happens if one of those residents is so restless that still in the afterlife it's taking vengeance on those it doesn't want around? Check this out. This is good.
Back in 1938, a series of stories of a killer ghost sprang up in eastern Kentucky. Even though no one ever saw the evil spirit, it is said to have caused 5 very similar and unexplained deaths. Let's return to June of that year. A man named Carl Pruitt came home from work one night and found his wife in bed with another man. Filled with rage, Carl attempted to kill his wife's lover, but he escaped by jumping out of a window. Pruitt instead strangled his own wife with a small piece of chain that he had in his shed. Sitting next to her lifeless corpse, sinking into a dark madness, he committed suicide. As an eternal punishment for his crime, he was buried in a separate cemetery from his wife. A few weeks after his funeral, visitors to the cemetery began to notice the pattern of a chain that was slowly forming on Pruitt's gravestone. The chain was caused by an unusual discoloring of the stone, and gradually it gained links until it formed the shape of a cross. Then suddenly, it stopped growing. A number of locals suggested that perhaps the supernatural marking on the tombstone meant that the entire stone should be removed from the graveyard and destroyed. But officials laughed at the idea, and nothing was done about it. One afternoon, a month or so after the chain had stopped growing, a group of young boys were passing on their bicycles near the cemetery. The group dared one of them, a boy named James Collins, to throw a few stones at Pruitt's cursed gravestone to prove that he wasn't afraid of such spooky stories. The boy hurled rocks, and one of them managed to chip a spot on the stone. As the young boys returned home, Collins's bicycle suddenly began to pick up speed to a point where he could no longer control it. It veered off the road and crashed into a tree. But when the boy was discovered, he lay next to the tree, an image of terror on his face and his bicycle chain wrapped around his neck. Rumors quickly spread like wildfire about this shocking event, but an examination of the Pruitt headstone revealed no damage to it. The other boys knew what they had seen. However, their accounts only created more speculation about a vengeful ghost. James Collins' mother was deeply heartbroken over her son's death. Less than a month after his accident, she went out to the cemetery and destroyed Pruitt's headstone with an axe. She hacked at it for what seemed hours until it lay in pieces. The following day, she was hanging the family washing out on a line. Now, this is where the story turns somewhat strange. The clothesline was made from small linked chain rather than a usual rope or wire. While hanging the clothes, she somehow slipped and fell, and her neck became entangled in the chain. She twisted and tried to free herself, but it was no use. She was strangled to death. The legends say that after she died, the Pruitt tombstone showed no sign of damage. Naturally, news of this incident spread quickly. A short time later, a farmer and 3 members of his family were passing in a wagon next to the cemetery. For some reason, the farmer proclaimed that he had no fear of ghosts and fired several shots at the Pruitt stone with his revolver. Chunks flew off the tombstone, and then in a flash, the horses pulling the wagon began to race down the road. They galloped faster and faster until the wagon was out of control. The family members all jumped to safety, but the farmer hung on, desperately pulling on the reins. As the wagon veered around a turn in the road, the farmer was thrown from his seat and he fell forward. His neck was caught on one of the trace chains, and the motion of the horses snapped his neck. Pruitt's tombstone showed no signs of damage once again. The local residents were now convinced of the fact that the grave was cursed. Events escalated to the point that a local congressman was contacted and 2 police officers were sent to the cemetery to investigate. When they arrived at the graveyard, one of the men began to laugh about the stories and make fun of the idea of so-called ghosts and curses. They took several photos of the headstone anyway, and then left to go and talk with the witnesses to the events involving it. As they were leaving, the doubting officer happened to look into the car's rear-view mirror. In it, he saw a bright light coming from the direction of the tombstone. At first, he assumed it was just the reflection of the car's taillights, but then it loomed closer to the car. Startled, he began to drive faster, but the light kept following, closer and closer. He drove faster and faster, always watching his mirror. His partner pleaded with him to slow down, but it was useless. The light was almost upon them. Just then, the car swerved off the road. It flipped. It rolled over and over several times. The officer in the passenger side was thrown clear from the wreckage and was only slightly injured. Shaken but able to walk, he went to his partner's aid. He found that his partner was dead, but he had been killed before the car was destroyed. As the car had passed between 2 poles, a chain that had been hanging between them had smashed through the car's windshield and had wrapped itself round the driver's neck. The force was so great that it had nearly cut his head clean off his shoulders. After this death, the residents of the town began to avoid the cemetery altogether. Only one man, named Arthur Lewis, dared to go there. He was out to prove that the stories of a cursed tombstone were nothing more than superstitious nonsense. One evening, after informing his wife of his intentions, he went to the graveyard with a hammer and a chisel and began to destroy the tombstone. The sound of the hammer and the cracking of stone could be heard by all who lived nearby. And they also heard the horrific scream that filled the night as well. Some men went down to investigate. When they arrived, they found Lewis dead, with the long chain that had been to keep the cemetery gate shut wrapped around his neck. Apparently something had frightened him, and he had made a mad dash to escape, forgetting about the chain that barred the entrance gate. Strangely, Even though about a dozen people had heard the sound of the man breaking Pruitt's gravestone, there were no marks to be found on it. After this final death, other graves were opened for reburial in other locations. People gradually moved away, and Pruitt's burial plot was eventually forgotten. Since he had no family left to care for his grave, the site became overgrown with weeds. In 1958, it was destroyed for good in a mining operation. During the operation of the mine, 5 strange deaths occurred, all linked by chains.
Welcome back. You know, it's like I was saying in the beginning. We have done almost 200 historic locations in the 4 years that we have been doing paranormal investigating. Yes, we've had interaction a few times. We've even had physical contact. But to run across a spirit who decades after he was put in the ground, he is still committing the same crimes over and over and over again. How do you make a spirit rest? How do you give him the peace that we all hope that we have after death? Are the stories even true? Or is it just a local community's imagination gone wild? Sadly enough, this story, much like every other one that we try to put on the channel, will always remain one of those mysteries that history left behind. But I hope you guys enjoyed this look at one more spooky story for the 31 days of Halloween here on Living History's Mysteries. The month is coming to an end. It's getting closer. Can't wait to see what I do for Halloween itself. But until then, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. God bless you. God love you. We do. And we'll see you out there.